All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Felicia with Celine Phoenix, also known as Jupiter's Corner. So today, I want to talk about the shadow side of being a highly sensitive person, the shadow side of being the outcast, the shadow side of being the one that's always being bullied constantly. So this can most likely start in your childhood, teenagehood, or even in your early adulthood and beyond. Okay. So this is something that I was just thinking about today, and I felt the urge to talk about it. All right. So my thoughts are not very organized. So please forgive me. Okay. I'm not perfect at all. So whatever I say, it may not make sense. But let's get started. So I want to discuss the shadow side and being a highly sensitive person or being the outcast. So let's start with what is the shadow side, the light side versus the shadow side. So you come out of your mother's womb, right? So, and once you come out of your mother's womb, you're most likely happy. You're most likely whole with no imperfections whatsoever. But as you grow older, whatever trauma that you picked up, any type of trauma, such as abuse from either from your parents or from other people or even from peers, neglect, bullying, those things can trigger someone to go deep into the shadow side. So they can be born metaphorically sitting in the good boy seat, right? And they can be seated there for so long. But once they've experienced being bullied or they experience any sexual trauma, such as rape, molestation, grooming, etc., it can push that quote unquote good girl, good boy person into the shadows. Now you're wondering, like, what is she talking about? What are you talking about? What does that mean? What I mean is whenever there is some type of trauma, you're going through the trauma, right? Whether it's bullying, whether it's sexual abuse, abandonment, neglect, and you can go through this from your parent, your siblings, your immediate family or extended family. You can go through this with your peers at school if you go to like a public or private school, and I'm really talking about when you're young, when you're in your foundational years, and you go through trauma, right? And you've been spiritually branded the outcast, because how you know you've been branded the outcast when you are being abused, whether you've been bullied, whether you're being sexually abused, whether you're being neglected or abandoned, and you try to say something about it, you get shut down. People don't care about your feelings. Your parents don't acknowledge your feelings. They just ignore you. They kind of ignore your feelings. They gloss everything. Or when you're at school and you're constantly being bullied, they blame you for the bullying, and they make you the perpetrator of the bullying, also known as the scapegoat. So you're constantly being blamed for your own abuse. So what does that do? That pushes that person into the shadow, because now this person is going to be hard for this person to remain a quote unquote good boy or quote unquote good girl. Okay. I guess I don't really like the term good boy, good girl, but that's kind of the only language that I can think of right now. So just please stay with me. Just please understand the concept of what I'm talking about. So when you're like a good boy, when you're like a good person archetype, right? So the good person archetype is the person that is looked at as a good person. Oh, this person was a good kid. This person never acted out. This person was so quiet and everything. And then they experience trauma, right? And all it takes is for that person to experience some type of trauma, and then that trauma not being acknowledged, not being validated, not being addressed because the parents or the people in authority ignore it, right? They ignore it. They shush that person away. The higher ups also tend to blame that quote unquote good person for the abuse that they're going through or the abuse that was inflicted on them, such as bullying, such as abandonment, neglect, sexual abuse. That will drive that good person into the shadow side. Okay, so there is something that is metaphorical, and it's called okay, so I want you to imagine a string, right? So you have a line or a string. So one side of the line is good, right? It's the good side. And then the other side of the line is evil, right? So you got good versus evil. Right. Kind of like the concept of Adam and Eve. And so Adam and Eve. So Eve was considered a quote unquote good woman or a good person, right? She was a good woman, good person, because she was subservient to Adam, right? And then Lilith, right? Lilith, she is a dark goddess. So she was the wife before Eve. Lilith was considered a quote unquote bad person or I don't want to say bad person. I don't think bad person is the word, but she refused to submit. She refused to be subservient to Adam. So she was kicked out the Garden of Eden or something like that. That pushed her into the shadow side, or that kind of pushed her to the shadow side of that line. So you got good versus evil. So we all know the evil would kind of be in the shadow, right? Because evil, the darkness, etc. So, and I heard somewhere in the TikTok and also on YouTube that evil always begets evil. I don't think anyone has actually said it, but I mean, from the videos that I've watched or the talks that I've heard about, and then also the crime documentaries that I watch, I came to the conclusion that evil always begets evil. And so now we got that out of the way. I mean, I'm not sure if Lilith was on the good girl spectrum, but she just refused to submit, and she was just kicked out the Garden of Eden, and so that's being pushed into the shadow now. So when Eve, right, Eve was sitting in the good girl spot or the good woman spot, right? She was being a good girl, not eating. She wasn't eating from the tree of knowledge. She wasn't supposed to eat from the tree, but a snake, right? A snake came upon her and tempted her to eat from the tree of knowledge. And she was not supposed to do that. So when you're a good girl or a good boy, like, you really have no knowledge of evil. You have no knowledge of, like, you're kind of naive. You're kind of on the naive, innocent side where you're kind of oblivious to the evils of the world. Like, you think that there's no such thing as evil. Like, you don't understand how somebody can be so evil, right? And then when she ate from the tree of knowledge, right? She ate from the tree of knowledge. Now she has a good understanding of good versus evil. And so Eve eating from the tree of knowledge is what pushed her to the shadow side of that line. So just imagine the line. Good, there's good on one side. So good is going to be on your right side, and then the shadow or the evil is going to be on your left side. So she went from the good side of the line, and then if you imagine like a little I guess you could imagine like a little boulder going from good on one side of the line all the way to the shadow side of the line, or the evil side of the line. So when she ate from the tree of knowledge, now she pushed herself into the shadow. She pushed herself all the way to the shadow side of the line. And guess what? That's what drove her out of the Garden of Eden, because she was not supposed to eat from the tree of knowledge. Because once you eat from the tree of knowledge, now you are becoming more like God, right? Or you'll become more, you're becoming more like God, as it says in the Bible, right? So now she has a knowledge of good and evil. So now, what is the point that I'm trying to make? I think I'm trying to make a point, but I don't know if I'm making any sense. But this thought had came into my mind, and I felt the urge to post this on my YouTube page. And I really just want to talk about this and then present a bigger picture to this type of concept. So now, what happens to this good person, right? This good person was never tainted. You know, when you're a baby, you're born out of your mother's womb, right? You're untainted, no trauma, no tainted, no nothing. It's kind of like you're a beautiful, clean, white sheet of paper, right? Until someone writes on it, someone paints on it, and, you know, and for a while, that picture can be a bit of a chaotic. So when you're going through trauma, right, it's kind of like someone taking a paintbrush or taking a pen, writing on that white sheet of paper. And even though it's not perfect in the beginning, meaning, okay, trauma, when you're going through trauma, you're not going to be perfect. Your mind, body, and soul is going to be in chaos. Your soul is going to become more fragmented. Okay. So you went from your soul being whole, which is the good person, or I guess the good person archetype, I guess, into the shadow side, because trauma is what pushes people into the shadows. And so when I think of good people being pushed into the shadows, I think of children being bullied, the outcasts, right? The outcasts, the chosen ones. When they get pushed into the shadows, you really don't know what's going to become of them. You don't know how they're going to react. Because if they've been in a good girl seat for long and they're being pushed into the shadow, most likely they're not going to know what to do with that shadow once they're being pushed into it. Like, there's really no tools on how to navigate trauma. Like, because you're not given any tools on how to navigate. Nobody cares about when you try to talk to someone, they kind of shush you off. They really tell you, oh, you're being negative and you're being draining and all this other kind of shit. I mean, you're kind of just being ignored, right? Kind of just being ignored. And I do want to talk about, so the extreme side of this is, a person can go from quote unquote good all the way to the shadow side, being pushed into the shadow due to trauma. That child could end up, right? They can end up going on shooting sprees, or they can end up taking someone's life. They can end up doing something so evil to the point that it's illegal, because they were pushed into the shadow side and they had no idea on how to navigate the shadow. right? It's kind of like once you do evil, you're kind of being pushed out of the Garden of Eden, metaphorically speaking, right? Because if you're living free right now, like you're just living free, then I mean, metaphorically, you're in the Garden of Eden. But then you experience trauma. I believe that it's kind of like the metaphoric way of eating from the tree of knowledge, because when you get pushed into the shadow side, that is where you get true knowledge from. You get true knowledge and wisdom when you are pushed into the shadow of, and most of the time that doesn't mean that you break the law or anything like that, but that can be an extreme case where some people, when they get pushed into the shadow side, they have no idea what to do, and they get to a point where they can end up illegally doing something to, kind of like shooting sprees, illegal activity, if you must. Or people who do have some form of self-control subconsciously because they don't want to go to jail, or they're too afraid of doing something illegal. So instead of taking it outward, they tend to go inward. And when they go inward, I mean, they end up self-harming themselves. This is where you have anorexic bulimia comes in. This is where self-harm, like cutting, hair pulling, etc., comes in. So it's either external or internal result of people being pushed into the shadow, because your body, I mean, the point of the internal and external vices that people get into, and even drugs and alcohol too. So it's people like that their bodies cannot fully handle the trauma alone. So they have all of these vices for their body, for them to protect their bodies from themselves, from the trauma that they're experiencing on the outside. So they have all of these vices. So vices such as drugs, alcohol, escapism, cutting, bulimia, anorexia, those type of vices, they provide protection. I know it sounds I know it kind of sounds like what do you mean it provides protection? So I'm going to give a really good example. So for me, I went through brutal bullying, right? I went through brutal bullying until a point where I would pull out my hair every single day. So, and also I went through narcissistic bullying from my own father. So subconsciously, I started pulling my hair out. I would pull my hair out, right? And I would pull it actually from the root, and it would provide me so much relief. So me pulling out my hair is what protected me. It gave me protection. It protected me while I was going through that type of trauma, right? So having these types of internal or external vices is what prevents someone who is going through trauma go through the edge. And those vices tend to be very, very toxic. Yes, that is true. And I know like some people, like they use healthier versions of vices such as keeping a diary or writing a journal. But most people don't have the luxury of that because they have narcissistic families that will invade their privacy, that will read their journals. They'll get confronted with it. And then you don't have a safe place anymore. So external and internal vices is according to the person going through said trauma, those were safer alternatives, and it provides some type of protection, right, from themselves to keep them from going over the edge. So, all right. Now, and what is the point that I'm trying to bring home? So I am trying to I'm going to best summarize like what I'm trying to bring home when I'm talking about the shadow side and being pushed into the shadows. So there is wisdom and being pushed into the shadows. There is wisdom in the shadow side. Looking into the shadows of everything that we interact with, to the people we get into relationships with, to your family, to your children, to your friendships, even the workplace. It is best to always look at the shadow side of everything. And then you can make a decision on how to safely navigate those type of dynamics without getting burned. Because because just like the Peter Pan concept, right, where Peter Pan remains a child forever, never goes through puberty, right, never goes through trauma, and he remains a child forever. That is so dangerous to remain naive forever, okay? Because you're not going to see the shadow side of the world that we live in, right? And another concept about remaining a virgin. I think there was a story about a woman who remained a virgin, and then she got with this guy, and she ended up being a single mother. So navigating life with this innocence type of mindset, or this quote unquote good girl, good boy mindset, it can really, you can really become a victim very, very easily, because you're not looking at the shadow side of people. People don't care about being a quote unquote good person. You know, there's like what I've learned through this whole experience of what I went through. Being a good person doesn't matter. Being a virgin doesn't matter. It does not matter. Okay? No one's going to care about that. You have to learn how to see people in a shadow lens. And once you do that, then you would be able to better navigate your life. All right? You will live a much happier life. I'm not saying everything is guaranteed, but you would most likely not become a victim. You're not going to become a victim of your own mind. You're not going to become a victim of your own circumstances, okay? So, thank you so much for listening to me today. All right. You have a great rest of your day. So, I will make more videos in the future. You have a great rest of your day. Bye-bye for now.